All right, everyone, this is Eric Clark, co-founder of IndyPUG. I want to first thank you so much for joining our first virtual meetup, this webinar today. So hopefully it's all working well, and maybe we'll do this in the future as well. But thanks again for joining today. We will start meeting again in January 2017. Physically at an office space somewhere. But we will send out an email to the email list and blast that out to our LinkedIn group as well when we have the location nailed down and the topic and all of the other details. So be looking out for that for next month when we resume that. We have today with us Matt Rydell, and he has been building visualizations for a long time using many tools. So today, obviously, we're going to be focusing on Power BI, but we have selected a data set, and essentially what Matt is going to do is walk us through how to build a dashboard from scratch in Power BI with this data set that we've got. So everybody is in listen-only mode because this is kind of a broadcast mode right now, but I believe there is comment box, and we will respond to that, but we won't have audio chatting back and forth. So, but please do use the comments on the live broadcast, and we can interact that way. So, I'm going to hand it over to Matt. Matt Rydell, take it away. Thanks again for doing this presentation for us today.
Hi, my name is Matt Rydell, and I'll be taking you through building a meaningful dashboard. A meaningful dashboard to me is a dashboard that really allows actionable insights to be derived and really creates an interactive experience for the user. It's not necessarily a bunch of pretty charts or just a bunch of numbers thrown at the end user. So today we're going to be building a dashboard for a CFO procurement team. Our goal is to derive insights from where they're spending data across multiple disparate systems. Some of these insights are looking for is their top areas of spend, the top suppliers, areas to consider sourcing products and developing strategic, meaningful relationships with suppliers, or managing on and off contract spend. Before we dig into creating a dashboard, let's dig into the data. So I've already combined the data and ETL'd it into a single flat file for simplicity of loading, as well as just makes it for an easier picture to discuss. This data is invoice data, which comes from multiple AP systems as well as a P-card system. It involves just the regular everyday company spend, licenses, employment fees, and things like that. It will have transaction dates, supplier names, business units, general ledger information, country, and a bunch of additional information. All the currencies have already been converted to USD, so we won't need to worry about any mixed currencies. We have a total USD column right here, as well as we've cleansed and classified the suppliers and data. When we mean cleansing the suppliers, you can see we have Toshiba come across a couple different ways, whether it be different systems or just different departments of Toshiba. But one way to really provide meaningful insight is having a group to name. Allows them to create this complete view. We've also categorized the data, so based on this transaction, it looks like it is a computer equipment spend. This will allow the CFO and procurement team to really dive into the data and figure out where they're spending their money. Okay, so we're about ready to build a dashboard. We've gone over the data. Normally I would actually take a deeper dive and really try to figure out what's in the data. But for brevity's sake, we'll just consider like we already have good knowledge of it. So let's talk about the dashboard. Some basics that I like to go through in a dashboard are creating KPIs at the top. These key performance metrics at the top really allow the user a quick view of what they're looking at. And you see how I have filtered spend and total spend. So as they interact with the dashboard, it will allow them to see what subset of the data they're looking at. As you filter and slice the data, all the charts will update, but the key is also to be able to see what slice of the data you're looking at, and this kind of allows them that subset. So if I click on a specific category, you can see how much spend it is out of the total spend, how much transactions or number of invoices it is out of the total invoices, as well as how many suppliers fall into that category. You also notice I've created some logical groupings. So instead of adding headers or additional colors to really distract the user, I've kind of used muted colors and shapes to logically group these into spend, transaction, and suppliers. So quickly at a glance, you can already tell that these are 3 separate items. And I found that's really a great way to, transfer some knowledge or really display something to the user without having to use headers or colors to distract from, of course, the main story. This dashboard will also follow a top-down, left-to-right design. So of course, as you first look at something, we all kind of consume information in the upper left-hand corner first. And then as we read a book or read a page, we kind of scroll across and scroll top to bottom. So that's kind of the design methodology here is let's first start with your KPIs. Then we'll dive into the data. And then we have your filters. A lot of people like to put the filters on the left side, but I've found that's kind of a waste of perfect spot for data, right? I shouldn't be looking at meaningless filters. I should be looking at meaningful data. So that's one thing I try to adhere to. Also using color meaningfully. So I'm not differentiating these bars with different colors because that doesn't provide any extra information. It just distracts the user. But necessary in this scatter plot, it helps to differentiate. These are different categories of information. As well as in the line chart, you can see that they're different on and off contract. They're different categories of information. Okay, so let's dive into building a dashboard. I'm just going to create a new tab here, or a new sheet. So now we have a clean sheet here to start with. I'll be replicating this, including all the individual objects. And we may skip over some things, but we'll at least get to the core of each object. So I'm going to start with the KPIs, but first I'm going to enable 2 features, show grid lines and snap to grid. I find these are very helpful for as you're dragging things around, it kind of automatically keeps spacing. And this will really give you a nice kind of crisp looking dashboard when things are spaced evenly and consistently. So the first thing we'll create is total spend. So all I've done is select the total USD, which gives me 2.15 billion, as we saw before. I'm going to add a title to it. I prefer titles over the kind of category label. One, it's at top. It's above the data versus below the data, and 2, it kind of allows you a little more customization, in my opinion. Okay, make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to resize these objects. I'm not sure if that's the right size, so I'm just going to peek back over here. There we go. Okay, so now that I have an object, I find it's easiest if I just copy and paste it. And I'm actually going to enable a border here. It kind of allows you for kind of quick viewing of how things are spaced versus having to kind of click on it and get this little box added to it. But this one we will change to total spend. I'm going to do the same thing again. This time move it a few squares apart. Oops. Copying. I'm just hitting Control C, Control V to really allow me to quickly copy and paste these objects. And I'm trying to accurately space them, though it looks like I did not get it right. Alright, so we'll peek back at this one real quick. And actually you can see the exact dimensions if you go to General. So you can see it's 192 by 64. And that's kind of what I mean by the devil's in the details. Consistent sizing will give you a much sharper looking dashboard. And in terms of consuming information, it'll make it more aesthetically pleasing and not distract the user, because having issues or things being off is just a distraction from the actual data. So when it's clean, simple, and then organized, it really helps with just quickly digesting it and not trying to figure out what I should be doing on the dashboard. So as I space these out roughly a few apart, and I try to leave them pretty evenly spaced. Okay, that's close. 3. This one's probably over here. Okay, so we have the base down for our KPIs. Now I'm going to go through and actually change the dimensions of them. So we had total spend, filtered spend. Now we're going to do filtered transactions, which I'll just use a unique ID and change these both over, rename them. And kind of how I came across these KPIs, you just put yourself in the shoes of the user. What would you want to see as you're slicing and dicing the data? Is spending going to be meaningful to you? Like if I had count of business units, that's probably not going to be that helpful, unless I really need that metric to know how many business units fall into this category, and kind of consistent across tabs. So now we'll do supplier groups. So in terms of procurement or a CFO, these are 3 kind of key metrics they look at. It really is important to know, hey, how many suppliers is in this category? Because it kind of becomes a risk issue if you have a lot of spend and a lot of suppliers versus a few suppliers and a lot of spend. If you have 3 suppliers and $1 billion spend, that all of a sudden becomes a risk issue. If one of those relationships goes sour, now you only have 2 suppliers, or if there's an issue with sourcing that item from them. Okay. Let's first, for consistency's sake, keep them named. So now that we have these over here, I'm going to change this to count distinct. Do I get my numbers right? Okay, so we have that done. Next thing we need to do is add some objects. I find these, again, useful for spacing. And I'm just going to create some, and then we'll space them out here appropriately. So first, let's turn off. I'm going to change the color to more of a muted color because I really don't want to distract the user. I also don't. I'm going to add a little bit of roundness. I think it looks a little cleaner. A little bit of transparency. Again, to kind of make it more of a muted color. Turn off fill. It's close, but not quite. And now one thing I need to do is copy and paste. So again, I'm going to repeat this process to really keep everything exactly the same. And then the key is to push it to the back so I can interact with the forward objects, being the KPIs. I'm going to turn off these borders so I can kind of see a little more better what it looks like. So this isn't exactly like the other one, but it's going to be close. And some of this will be you build it, kind of get an idea of what it looks like or how it looks or how it feels, and then tweaking it. Okay, now we'll add the line, and the line will really be useful for kind of keeping these things grouped at the kind of outer level, but still kind of slicing that they're subsets of each other, or that the first is a subset of the second. So I'm going to make the colors match. and then do the same, and even make it a little bit thinner. There. Can be easier. Just type that in. Okay, so now we have a KPI box. We'll just make sure to push those in the back. So again, I can get to my KPIs without having to deal with the boxes or the lines. Okay, so that area is done. And if you kind of want to get an idea what it looks like, you can turn off the grid lines. Everything looks pretty evenly spaced. So next thing we'll be creating our 4 basic charts. So let's kind of get an idea of spacing on this. I'm going to actually add a rectangle for my filters to use the spacing, so that way I can account for that space ahead of time. We'll try for something like that. Let's grab my chart. So I'm just trying to not overlap them too much, but make sure they're still even. Oops. And then we'll just duplicate it a bunch. Okay. I won't go any further. Let's check our dimensions. 328, 304. This is a little bit taller. It doesn't have to be perfect. I prefer things to be pretty even unless they need to be different size. So now it looks like we're pretty close. Okay. So that's done. Now let's add a chart. The first one we'll be building is the total spend by category group. So as I add now my total USD, I'll make sure it's summed. Now add my category levels on there. That one didn't make it to the right spot. Okay. So we're almost there. Again, I'm going to change the color just for personal preference. More of a muted blue I find a little more pleasing. Now we're going to sort it negatively by spend or decreasing by spend. So you really see your top categories first. And that'll be our first one. You can add things like data labels. You know, I find charts to be good for grasping information quickly, but again, unless I actually hover over these, it doesn't give me exact numbers. So I'm going to turn on my data labels and format them to a meaningful number like millions, since these are all pretty large numbers. One thing you could even consider is putting them on the inside, so you really only see the top numbers. And then as it gets lower, and for the most part, you know, we're going to be focusing on these top areas. It kind of doesn't keep cluttering up the charts, so we can leave it like that. Next one, we're going to do total spend by supplier. So let's put my supplier name and group up there. A group, again, is that top level hierarchy on there. So then as I add my USD, it's going to be the same concept. And one thing we could have done is created that first chart and then just copied it a bunch. So we didn't have to change these colors, but it's really not that big of a deal. Oh, I'm actually going to change this title to be spend by supplier. So one thing that kind of goes into a clean, meaningful look is really making sure your chart titles make sense. It's very consistent, short, not just having a bunch of extra words in there. So this says total USD by UNSPSC level. I'm actually going to change that to be spend by UNSPSC category. Okay. So if you're getting a little bit, we can turn off the grid lines now that we've made it this far. So we have most of the chart done. or most of the dashboard. Let's see what the other two were. Spend trend by quarter year, so a little bit of time series information, as well as a scatter plot of, making sure managing your risk and your sourcing areas. So for this one, we're going to do the contract status, as well as transaction quarter year, and the total USD. Change that to align. Now you'll notice that the bottom is actually already in order, but I'm going to sort it just to be sure. There we go. We'll add our new chart name. Okay. And actually, okay, now let's build a scatter plot. Let's change our chart type. So it'll be total spend on the y-axis by supplier count on the x-axis, unique supplier count. And now we're going to add the UNSPSC category onto it. So let's make some minor changes to this. I prefer filled points in this case. Makes it a little easier to be seen. You can also turn off the legend or alter the data points. So I'm just going to clean it up a little bit. Actually, we can shorten that to L1 just to save space. Alright, so we can make a few minor adjustments. I don't really like how it's formatting this to 500 million. It looks a little weird to me. So I'm going to change that to million. Seems a little more meaningful. One other thing we can do is, if we see something we don't like, no, those are already good. Change the chart title. So this is spend versus supplier count. UNSPSC category. And again, this is going to show the CFO some insight into where they're spending their money, and each kind of quadrant of this makes a little bit more sense to a CFO. So this bottom right might be considered an area where you need to consolidate suppliers, because you have a ton of suppliers with a little bit of spend, so it doesn't really make sense to have that, right? Whereas the upper left here is saying you need to really manage these relationships and mitigate risk. And there's really nothing in this upper right-hand corner, and the bottom left is usually too small of an area to really worry about. The last thing we have to finish here is the filters or fields area, whichever you prefer. So I'm going to go back and change it like we had before. I'm going to make this a 1 point. We don't need it quite as bold. Oops. So now we'll add some field filters, or some slicers as they refer to them. So let's get one down here for sizing. The first one, we're going to have some date filters. It really allows you to kind of, instead of having multiple year view, you can really look at one specific year or a specific month or quarter or a subset of that even. So we'll just start with transaction year. And instead of list, I'm going to do drop down. It saves a little bit of space. So again, I'm going to title this, because trans year doesn't sound very good, but if I just put year, it gets you a little bit nicer look. And we'll actually make that just slightly bigger, make it a little bit darker. And I think that'll be our first slicer. So I'm just gonna, I moved the wrong one there. Start up there. We can actually move these in just a little bit so they aren't right on the edge there. Okay, so now we're gonna add one for quarter. Change the title. And then we'll do month as well. We'll do number so it sorts appropriately. Okay, so now we have month, or you could call that period in some cases. So a quick check, there we have all our months, all our quarters, and all of our years. So I'm going to add a little divider here now to kind of keep that same logical grouping. Those are our date filters. Oops. So now that we have date filters, we're going to add some just regular field filters. Change this information back to our same color. Rotate it 9 degrees so it's okay. And then I'm going to send it backwards so it doesn't block the other objects. So now it's not really even an option to select. Okay, that looks pretty well grouped. Now I'm going to keep this object and create a new one. So, throw one. Okay. So we'll create a couple of these. And again, I'm just using Control-C, Control-V to paste. And really that snap to grid line is making this a pretty quick and painless process. I don't remember how many we had in the other dashboard, but we'll stop here. Okay. You can space these however you see fit. I'm just kind of leaving them pretty tightly grouped. So the first one, we'll create one for, let's do supplier group so people can filter on their suppliers. And from here, it's a pretty repetitive process. We can do UNS PSC category. So I need to be back on this one. Let's do business unit. And the fields I'm choosing here are likely important fields to the end user. They're really going to be something that you'd want to slice the data by or filter by to kind of get an idea of what the spend is in this area versus this area. So I've kind of, just given the fact that I have a little bit of a knowledge about it, makes this a lot easier. And that's why kind of before you even start, you really need to kind of gain an understanding of, one, what's in the data, but just as importantly, two, what the end user would experience. And so when building this, I'm always considering what would I be looking at if I put my shoes in the CFO or procurement team shoes. What would they find meaningful? What kind of insights or actionable information are they looking for? And so that's kind of a question I'm always asking myself as I build a dashboard, and making sure that everything I'm doing is adhering to that end unit or that end goal. So we'll just put GL description as the last one. I can't remember what the other dashboard was, but this is also very helpful because it's kind of goes to where it's filed in terms of tax reasons, so you can kind of get a pretty good idea of where that spend belongs, unlike cost center, which might be just some internal company. Okay, so I've respaced that. Kind of looking at it, I could add numbers to this one to be consistent with that object. So I've chosen bar charts because they are probably one of the best or most versatile chart objects. It gives you a very quick view of what the spend is, unlike a pie chart, which really has just that one single use of a snapshot, and then it's basically useless. Where here is, bar chart always kind of provides some insight, as well as the exact numbers that you'd be interested in. Okay, so those are done, and let's do the same thing. Actually, you know what, I might do the auto on this one, just for difference. And you can drill into these, which is why I always add that extra dimension. It allows you to kind of get two charts for the price of one. Especially when there's something so close as supplier name, supplier group, or different levels of categories. It just kind of makes sense to consolidate that to a single report instead of wasting real estate or extra tabs or sheets of adding information that is basically the same. All right, well, this concludes the presentation. I hope you guys found it useful. And if you have any questions, Brian and Eric will be there to answer them for you. Thanks for coming, and have a great day.